It's Saturday, July 19th, and we have a large risk of severe weather today, which stretches all the way from the US-Canada border in the northern plains all the way out into the northeast. And we have two slight risk of severe weather. One is going to be out here in the central plains, and our other one is going to be out here, which stretches from the central plains all the way back into the Great Lakes region. Today's risk is mostly going to be wind driven, with the highest probabilities of some damaging winds being back here in the central plains and parts of Nebraska and northwestern Kansas, and our other parts being back here in the central plains through the Midwest and into the Great Lakes region. In our 15%, we could see gusts in excess of 65 miles an hour. Then we have a large 5% conditional risk of some damaging winds, which in this area we could see anywhere between some strong winds, then some severe winds all the way up to 60 miles an hour. Our hail risk is going to be more isolated to our central plains risk area back here in Nevada. I do think we could actually see it expanded a bit more northward. And in this risk area, I do think some large hail will be in play, possibly even being over 1.5 inches in diameter. And there is a 2% pretty conditional tornado threat highlighted out here in the Midwest and Great Lakes region, but I do think there is an area of tornado potential which stretches all the way back into the central plains and even a bit northward into the northern plains. That is not highlighted here, but we'll cover why I think that is in a bit. And we're going to have a fairly large flash flooding risk. It's going to cover all the way back from parts into the central plains, Midwest, Ohio River Valley, then through the mid-Atlantic. And in this slight risk area for some flooding, we could see anywhere between 2 to 4 inches of rainfall. Then we have a very scattered marginal risk of flooding, which anywhere in this marginal risk, we could see anywhere between 1 to 2 inches of rainfall. Unfortunately for our folks out here in the mid-Atlantic, I do think this is where the greatest risk of flash flooding will be today, considering the sheer amount of rainfall that they have gotten in the past couple of weeks. And it looks like starting around the afternoon hours, there is going to be widespread 1 to 2 inches of rain dropped on this region once again, and there could be some isolated patches being around 3 to 4 inches as well. And another area where I do think we could see some pretty intense rainfall starting all the way in the very early morning today, we could see a couple of corridors which stretch down all the way from the central plains through the Midwest and into the Great Lakes region and Ohio River valleys. And in these corridors, we're going to see a couple of well-defined ones, one going from Minnesota through Iowa and down into western Illinois, one going through central Wisconsin, then another one back here in northeastern Nebraska. I do think there is the possibility of seeing widespread 3 to even 5 inches of rain, and then around them, I do think we could see the threat of widespread 1 to 2 inches of rain as well. And it looks like this threat will last through the entire day, even into the night today, and even into Sunday morning, where it looks like we could see a pretty intense corridor of rainfall dropped on central Iowa with a widespread area of 3 to 5 inches of rain as well. And then once again, it's going to be very hot across much of the southeastern United States and parts of the central to southern plains. These are feels like temperatures, and we're going to see widespread low hundreds across the southeast and back into our southern and central plains area. I do think we could also see widespread high 90s to low 100s as well, with actually a little tongue even up here into parts of the northern plains with some 90s. And this is one of the days where pretty much everywhere in the country is going to be feeling some above average temperatures. And tropical activity has returned to the Atlantic Ocean. We have an area highlighted by the National Hurricane Center, which has a 20% chance of formation. Now, this is pretty far out from impacting any land at all, so we're not really going to go into a deep dive today, but in the future it could possibly definitely bring an impact to the Caribbean islands, specifically the Lower Antilles, and in the greater future even possibly the US could be at risk. So this is definitely something to watch out for, but currently this is just something to stay aware of and definitely look for updates on. Here is our simulated reflectivity from our Midwest risk area, and we're going to see that our storm complex, which is expected to impact the area today, is actually going to start very early this morning as a cluster all the way up here in parts of the central plains and northern Midwest, and it's going to push east-southeast as we go through the night and possibly bring that threat of damaging winds in the morning. This is going to be initiated by some frontal activity and some troughing, as well as a couple of embedded low pressure systems in a warm front, which is going to overspread much of central Michigan. And starting this morning, we could see severe gusts, and these will last pretty much all the way through the day. And other things to note with these storms will be some small hail and even the possibility of a couple of spin-up tornadoes. Now, our main clusters are going to be one which goes all the way through Iowa and then into Illinois. And then our other main cluster is going to be up here in parts of Michigan. And I do think our cluster up here in Michigan has a bit more of a chance to be stronger and bring some higher severe winds, as it is going to be attached to that low pressure system and warm front complex, which has a tendency to do that thing. And I also think that's where the greatest risk of a couple of spin up tornadoes will be today. Now, something that this large complex of storms has done, which will be pretty instrumental for our storms further west, is it has laid an outflow boundary across the terrain, which will definitely help to strengthen and intensify those storms. And as we go further into the afternoon hours, and even as the low level jet starts to kick up, we could see a couple of storms out here along that outflow boundary initiated, which would have some fairly decent tornado ingredients when they are attached to that boundary. But it looks like pretty quickly they will unattach from that boundary and then they'll sputter out. But this is a solution where we could see some tornado potential out here in parts of southern Iowa potentially as well. Our second main area of concern is going to be out here in the central plains, where we could see some storm initiation by the early to mid afternoon along our high plains convergence zone, which will be aided by a high pressure system back here in the southwest and Great Basin, some troughing activity and some frontal activity as well. And then, of course, the outflow boundary, which has been laid across the region, which could possibly bring a stronger corridor in parts of Nebraska and Kansas right here. And as these storms mature and go later into the day, they're going to move eastward. And the main threat with these storms would be some potentially large hail, some isolated severe gusts. And I'm actually going to say that the tornado potential with these storms is not zero. So definitely, I do think all hazards of severe weather could be in play out here in the central plains. So in the earlier stages of these storms, it looks like they will be discrete for a bit, which would increase that threat for some large hail and possibly even a weak, short-lived tornado. But it looks like they will cluster into a line of storms and pretty much track along that boundary laid out by those storms in the earlier parts of the day. And at this point, after nightfall, I do think the main threat with these storms would just be some isolated strong winds or even a couple of damaging gusts. And another interesting thing that the HRRR is specifically picking on is a cluster of storms initiated up here in parts of Iowa, once again by some outflow, which could bring the possibility of a couple of damaging gusts as well. The second to last specific region that we're going to look at today is going to be up here in the northern plains, where I do think there is going to be the risk for a couple of high base storms bringing that threat for some large hail and some isolated damaging gusts. And I do think this threat would begin around the mid-afternoon, where we could get a couple of discrete cells initiated by some troughing up here along the Minnesota and Dakota's border. And I'm actually going to say that these storms would not have a zero tornado potential as well, but it looks like they're going to pretty much cluster somewhat quickly into a line, and that would happen by right after nightfall in the evening hours. And then at this point, the main threat with these storms would just be some isolated strong gusts or even a couple of damaging gusts nearing 60 miles an hour. Then an area which has not been highlighted by the National Weather Service for some severe weather today, but I do think it possibly could be as we progress further, it's going to be out here in the mid-Atlantic, where we're just going to have a moist and unstable environment and a lot of thunderstorm activity tracking through the region, which will be able to interact with a front up here in Virginia. And I do think there is that conditional threat for a couple of severe storms bringing some damaging gusts to the region once again today. Here are 500 millibar winds, and once again, we're going to want to look for a couple of short waves, which are going to help to initiate some of our severe storm clusters. One is going to be a short wave out here early this morning, which is going to help to initiate our clusters, which will push back and redevelop as we go further into the day. Then our next short wave that we're going to want to look for is going to be back here in the central plains, and there it is right around the late afternoon to evening hours, which is also going to help to intensify some of those storms with some greater organizing shear, but mostly could help to initiate a couple of storms. And we're going to have another short wave up here in the northern plains, which is going to help to initiate that storm cluster as well. Here is a weather sounding from our risk area up here in Michigan in front of that mesoscale convective vortex. And we are going to see a fairly straight photograph. Our shear isn't going to be super terrible in front of our MCV, and our helicity, I predict, will be somewhat okay. And then we're actually going to have a decent bit of organizational shear and some wind veering, which could possibly bring some organized storms. And our lowest cloud level would be low enough to support possibly a couple of spin-up tornadoes. Our low-level lapse rates are going to be pretty high, which would support that threat for some severe winds. And we have some cape along our freezing level. Then our mid-level lapse rates aren't going to be super low. So definitely the possibility of some small hail out here as well. We do have some dry air loft, which could support that threat for some damaging winds. And we have a very moist environment coupled with a fairly unstable environment at around 2,000 cape. So definitely favorable for some severe weather, then our precipitable water is going to be 1.55 inches, which is one of the reasons why I do think a flooding threat could possibly unfold out here in Michigan, and then that also could help to intensify some downdrafts, bringing that severe wind threat. Then our 3 cape is going to be at 130, which is going to be quite high. So another reason why there's just that general threat of severe weather and possibly even the threat of a couple of weak tornadoes. Now, I do think the threat for tornadoes is going to be contingent on how much convection there is, and it does look like there's going to be quite a bit. So that is the reason why it's going to be pretty conditional. I do think definitely all hazards of severe weather could be in play up here in Michigan. Here is a weather sounding out here in the Central Plains, and this definitely immediately looks very interesting. We have a big curve in our photograph and a nice elongation. Our helicity and our low-level shear look very conducive for possibly a couple of tornadoes, and our organizational shear also looks quite good at around 40 knots, which is quite good for some organized storms. That's going to be coupled with some wind veering. So definitely a couple of organized storms and possibly even discrete storms out here in the Central Plains. Then we have quite a bit of cape up here near our freezing level. Then our mid-level lapse rates are going to be 8.3 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer. So definitely some large hail with that discrete storm threat out here in the Central Plains. Our lowest cloud level would be enough to support possibly a tornado threat, and it's going to be super unstable out here at around 5,500 joules per kilogram of cape. And then this is going to be coupled with a precipitable water of over 2 inches, which could fuel that threat for some severe winds, and a downdraft cape of 1,000, and a 3 cape, which is going to be also quite high at 107. So things that would support that threat for some damaging winds, general severe weather, and even the possibility of a tornado. But it looks like the main hindrance for our tornado threat is going to be some stable air in the low levels, which definitely introduces a lot of questions about if it will be there, and also could weaken that threat for severe winds, absolutely. But I do think there is definitely going to be the conditional threat of all hazards of severe weather out here in the Central Plains today. Moving a bit more north into the Northern Plains, this is a photograph and weather sounding from up here. We have some curvature in our photograph and a nice elongation. Our helicity and low-level shear don't look super great, but our bulk shear is going to be very conducive for some organized storms at around 50 knots. And then we're also going to have that coupled with some pretty nice wind veering. So definitely some organized discrete storms up here in the Northern Plains. Then we have a decent bit of cape up here near our freezing level. Then our mid-level lapse rates are going to be at around 8.0 or 7.9 Celsius decrease per kilometer. So another reason for that hail threat. And that's going to be coupled with that bulk shear. So strong updrafts. So definitely some large hail, or the possibility of large hail up here in the Northern Plains. Our lowest cloud level would be low enough to possibly support a tornado threat, but our shear and our spin in the atmosphere doesn't really look like it'll be too conducive for it. But I definitely think there's not a 0% chance of a tornado possibly happening up here. Our low-level lapse rates are going to be pretty high, so definitely the threat of some isolated severe gust. We're also going to have some okay mixing. We're going to have some dry air loft, which would support that threat for some severe gust. And our moisture is going to be okay at a 61 dew point. That's going to be coupled with a fairly unstable air mass at around 2,000 cape. So definitely some severe weather could be in play up here in the Northern Plains. And this is going to be coupled with a downdraft cape of 1,300. So another reason why I think some isolated severe gusts could be up here in the Northern Plains. So because we do have some curvature on our photographs, and we're likely going to have some very organized discrete storms, which could be high base, but it looks like our lowest cloud level could be low enough to support a tornado threat. I'm not going to say that there is a 0% tornado threat out here, but it's not looking super likely. It looks like the main threat is going to be some large hail and some isolated damaging gusts up here in the Northern Plains.